In a quiet corner of Tutvan, the morning sun stretched over the mountains. The streets were still, only the faint shuffle of early risers moving through their routines. That morning, she expected the usual rhythm, birds pecking at crumbs, the neighbor's goat bleating in the distance, the silence of solitude wrapping itself around her. But instead, she heard something else. A deep sound, low and broken, almost like a moan carried on the wind. It was not human, yet it was filled with a strange kind of plea. Setting her cup down with trembling hands, she went to the door, pulling it open as the chill of morning rushed in. There, only a few feet away, stood a massive bear. Not standing tall, not roaring in threat, but crouched low on her porch, her great body trembling. Her fur was ragged, tangled with dirt and leaves, her sides heaving as though each breath took all her strength. And her belly, heavy and round, left no doubt she was pregnant and very near to giving birth. Aylin's first instinct was fear. She clutched the doorframe, her heart hammering. A wild bear at her doorstep should have been a nightmare. Yet the longer she looked into those eyes, deep, dark, and full of desperation, the less she felt afraid. The bear did not advance, did not growl. She lowered her great head and let out another moan, almost like a sob. It wasn't the sound of a predator. It was the sound of a mother in need. Something stirred in Aylin's chest, a memory of years gone by. She remembered her daughter, heavy with child long ago, her face pale with pain, whispering for help. She remembered the fear of not knowing what to do, the relief when the midwife arrived. And now, before her stood another mother, though not human, with the same desperate plea in her eyes. Slowly, Aylin whispered, "Tamam, Tamam." She backed inside, not to shut the door, but to gather what she could. She brought out old wool blankets and spread them over the porch, her hands shaking as she dared to move closer. The bear did not lunge or retreat. She lowered herself gratefully onto the softness, groaning as if every bone in her body ached. Aylin fetched a clay bowl of water and placed it within reach. The bear sniffed, then lapped weakly, her massive tongue curling against the rim. Aylin knew she could not handle this alone. Her hands were old, her knowledge too small. So she hurried across the yard to her neighbor's house, breathless as she explained what was happening. At first, the neighbor thought she had gone mad. A bear on her porch? But curiosity and alarm spread quickly. Within an hour, word traveled through the narrow streets. A pregnant bear had come to Aylin's home asking for help. Some villagers came out of caution, some out of wonder. A few stood at a safe distance, murmuring about danger, about calling hunters. But Aylin silenced them with a firm voice that surprised even her. She is not here to harm us. She is here to ask for mercy. The murmurs quieted. There was something about the sight of the bear, stretched weakly on the blankets, that disarmed even the most fearful hearts. The bear did not lunge or retreat. She lowered herself gratefully onto the softness, groaning as if every bone in her body ached. Aylin fetched a clay bowl of water and placed it within reach. The bear sniffed, then lapped weakly, her massive tongue curling against the rim. Aylin knew she could not handle this alone. Her hands were old, her knowledge too small. So she hurried across the yard to her neighbor's house, breathless as she explained what was happening. At first, the neighbor thought she had gone mad. A bear on her porch? But curiosity and alarm spread quickly. Within an hour, word traveled through the narrow streets. A pregnant bear had come to Aylin's home, asking for help. Some villagers came out of caution, some out of wonder. A few stood at a safe distance, murmuring about danger, about calling hunters. But Aylin silenced them with a firm voice that surprised even her. She is not here to harm us. She is here to ask for mercy. The murmurs quieted. There was something about the sight of the bear, stretched weakly on the blankets, that disarmed even the most fearful hearts. Among the crowd, someone made the call that mattered most. They contacted Dr. Sem Kaya, a veterinarian known across the region for his kindness toward both farm and wild animals. Sem had grown up in Tatvan, in a family that never turned away a stray. He had built his life around the belief that all creatures, great or small, deserved compassion. When the call reached him, he did not hesitate. Within the hour, he arrived at Aylin's home, carrying a worn leather bag of supplies, his face lined with concern, but steady in its resolve. He approached carefully, his steps deliberate. The bear's ears flicked, her eyes opening at his scent. but she did not rise. Sem knelt a few feet away, studying her breathing, the strain in her belly, the weakness of her limbs. He didn't need long. "She is in trouble," he said quietly. "The cubs will not come on their own. She needs surgery, now." A hush fell over the villagers. Surgery? Here, in this simple stone house with wooden floors and an old stove crackling in the corner? But Sem's voice carried the kind of certainty that left no room for hesitation. "If we wait, she and her cubs will die." The house became a flurry of motion. Neighbors brought buckets of hot water, clean sheets, lamps for light. Furniture was pushed aside, tables cleared. Aylin's heart raced as she fetched anything Sem asked for, her frail hands finding new strength. This was her home, and tonight it would become a place of life or death. Sem worked with calm precision, even as sweat dampened his brow. He prepared the anesthesia carefully, knowing how fragile the balance was for such a massive yet weakened creature. Every few seconds, his eyes darted between the bear's chest and the crude monitor he had set up. Aylin and two younger men stood ready at his side, handing him tools, wiping his hands, following his firm instructions. When the first incision was made, silence filled the room. Only the crackle of the fire and the rhythmic beeping of the monitor broke it. Sem's hands were steady, his movements sure. Minutes stretched long, the air heavy with tension. Then he reached the womb. One by one, the cubs were lifted out. Tiny, limp, fragile, their fur slick, their bodies barely moving. A wave of fear swept through the room. Aylin's knees nearly buckled, but Sem was already in motion. He rubbed their tiny chests, cleared their airways, wrapped them in warm towels. "Breathe," he whispered, as if his words could call them into life. And then, a miracle. A faint cry, weak but real. The sound was so small, it might have been missed if the room had not been so still, every ear straining, every chest tight with prayer. But there it was, fragile yet determined, the sound of life pushing through against all odds. Then another followed, softer but insistent, as if the first voice had called its sibling into the world. The villagers who had been holding their breath released it all at once. A collective exhale that seemed to lift the weight pressing down on the room. Shoulders dropped, hands unclenched, and the fear that had clung to the air like smoke began to dissolve. Some of the men who had sworn themselves hard against tears found their eyes burning. Mothers clutched their children closer, whispering blessings under their breath. Tears glistened in Aylin's eyes as she reached out with steady hands to hold a towel against one of the cubs, feeling the tiny heartbeat flutter against her palm. It was faint but steady, as if the little creature was already determined to live. She bent her head close, her grey hair brushing the edge of the blanket, and whispered words no one else could hear. They were not prayers exactly, nor were they lullabies, but something older, a language of comfort known only to those who have held fragile life in their arms. Around her, the villagers leaned in, drawn not just by the sight of the cubs, but by the change that had swept through the space. The room, once heavy with fear, now pulsed with hope. Sem continued, bringing each cub into the world, until at last the bear's womb was empty. The mother lay motionless, her chest rising faintly under the strain of anesthesia. But when Sem finished the final stitches and placed the cubs near her muzzle, something stirred. Slowly, weakly, she lifted her massive head. Her nose brushed against the tiny bodies, and a low rumbling sound escaped her, a sound that was not a growl, but a mother's sigh. She was alive, and so were her cubs. For the first time in years, Aylin's home was filled not with silence, but with the soft squeaks of new life. Villagers who had come in fear now stood in awe. They had not just witnessed an animal giving birth, they had witnessed a bridge between worlds, wild and human, bound by the language of motherhood. Through the night, Aylin and her neighbors worked in shifts, keeping the cubs warm, checking the mother's stitches, offering water and gentle care. Sem stayed until dawn, his hands and clothes stained, but his eyes bright with quiet triumph. "They will live," he said simply, and those words felt like a blessing. Days passed. The bear regained strength, her eyes brighter, her movements steadier. She nursed her cubs on Aylin's porch, watched over by the old woman who had not turned her away. What had begun as a fragile moment of desperation slowly grew into a rhythm of survival. Aylin would rise with the first pale light of dawn, set her kettle to boil, and step outside to see the mother bear curled protectively around her cubs. The sight filled her chest with something she could only describe as awe, as though the mountain itself had laid a secret at her doorstep. The neighbors who had first been afraid began to come by with quiet footsteps and softened voices. They brought food, blankets, and whatever supplies might help the strange family. Their fear was replaced with reverence, the kind people hold for miracles they do not fully understand. Children gathered near the gate, whispering stories that the bear had chosen Aylin because she had the heart of a mother, because she carried a warmth that the wild itself recognized. The tales grew in every retelling, spreading from house to house until the whole village seemed to walk a little gentler, as if not to disturb the sacred trust between woman and beast. Sometimes at night, Aylin would sit with her shawl pulled tight, a lamp glowing beside her, and she would hear the cubs' tiny whimpers mingle with the rustle of the trees. She thought of her own children who had long grown and gone, scattered to faraway cities, and she realized that nurturing had never left her. It had only been waiting, patient and quiet, until something in need came knocking. She smiled at the thought, though her eyes often brimmed with tears she did not wipe away. When the time came for Sem, the wildlife officer, to move the family to a proper sanctuary, the moment felt heavier than Aylin expected. She had known all along it could not last. Her porch was only a refuge, not a forever home. Still, when Sem arrived with the truck and the tranquil voices of other helpers, Aylin stood at the door, her hand pressed against the wooden frame for strength. The bear paused at the edge of the steps before leaving, her massive body framed by the early light. For a long heartbeat, her dark eyes met Aylin's. In that look was something no words could capture: gratitude, trust, and an unspoken bond woven tighter than thread. The bear turned, nudging her cubs forward. They tottered after her, stumbling yet determined, guided into safety by the man who had come to carry them toward a life that would be their own. Aylin watched until they disappeared down the road, until the sound of their passage became nothing more than memory. Only then did she step back inside, the air of her home suddenly heavier and quieter than she remembered. The house grew quiet again, but it was no longer the same silence she had once known. Before, silence had been emptiness, a hollow reminder of age and solitude. Now it was alive, full of echoes, the shuffle of tiny paws, the low rumble of a protective mother, the steady beat of her own courage. Aylin sat with her tea by the window, her heart fuller than it had been in many years. She knew the forest now held a family that might not have survived without her porch, her blankets, her choice to open the door when instinct urged her to shut it. And though she was old and alone, she felt less so now. She had been part of something larger than herself, something woven into the fabric of both human and wild. It proved to her, and perhaps to everyone who whispered about it, that kindness could cross even the sharpest divides, could bridge the distance between claw and hand, between fear and trust. And all of it had begun with a knock at her door that wasn't a knock at all, but the desperate plea of a pregnant bear who believed in human mercy.